There's a lot of sacrifice that happens in order to be a part of a community. People are going to bug you. People are annoying. But how do you measure the discomfort, the inconvenience that you're willing to just overcome in order to be in this thing? Because nothing is more convenient and friction-free than being alone. But it is like tearing away at the fabric of our society.
Welcome to In Confidence, where what we share in confidence helps us grow in confidence. This week's theme is all about leading with compassion and curiosity. And I invited today's guest on because she is an expert on both topics. My guest today is Kim Lear, the founder of Inlay Insights. Kim prepares leaders for the changing workforce and marketplace. The way she does it is she leads these huge generational research studies. So she is a generational researcher, and her work decodes generational perceptions from work ethic and compensation to spending, sacrifice, well-being. Kim helps leaders see the world through another generation's eyes so they can meet friction with curiosity, confusion with clarity, and paralysis with decisive action. I love that she holds up a mirror so we can see ourselves and see others and understand why the things around us are happening. Her insights offer a roadmap to where we've been, how we got here, and where we're headed. She's here to help us explore what it really means to lead with compassion and curiosity across generations. Let's listen in. Kim, welcome to In Confidence.
Thank you so much for having me. I've so been looking forward to this.
And I would say before we get started, we have to do a special shout out to our dear friend, Jacqueline Wahlberg,
Yes.
who sent us both emails and text messages and said, you have to be friends. I just know you're going to be friends.
And she was so right. She's always right.
I know we scheduled 30 minutes and then it turned into an hour and a half on the phone.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's exactly what happened. And it just kept to go, and it could have gone longer because you're so interesting and there was a million things to talk about and our work intersects in interesting ways, and yeah.
And I can't wait to read your book at some point because we came up with the title on the call.
Lisa came up with the title. I had an idea, and then Lisa was able to, in 2 seconds, come up with a title. So,
well, we're going to delve into that idea today, and then I will unveil my title, and we'll see in 5 years when it's on bookshelves if that's the title that your publisher said would be okay, because your editor will have thoughts. So we always start every episode with our signature question, which is, what are you proudest of in the last 12 months of your life?
So I'm actually really proud of how my work and my business has evolved. And I think that this has been, maybe more has happened even more than just the past 12 months, but I feel like I have really recognized it in the past 12 months that I feel like for a long time, I felt like in my business, I am very reactive to like the needs of my clients. I'm reactive to like what the marketplace demands. And I think I always viewed that as very unstrategic, like, oh, I should have like a much more clear-cut business strategy around this. And then I feel like in the last 12 months, I've really seen that my ability to be really adaptable has, I'm really proud of that because it's been a wild time. And I think because of my adaptability, I was able to capture amazing research like right when the pandemic started happening. And we never remember things accurately in the rearview mirror. So if you're trying to find accurate insights, like you need to be ready to do that in the moment and create an architecture for a research project in the moment. And I was able to do that then. And then for this year, there were other just as AI is unfolding and some of the economic volatility and being able to really adapt my projects to the sense of urgency of our time. I'm proud of that.
Well, I will always say innate strengths and capabilities will always trump a 5-year plan, FYI, because there's no plan that can predict how awesome you are. And for those of our audience who don't know who you are, how do you make a difference in the world? What is your business?
Uh, well, I study generations is what my background and what I've spent my entire career doing. And but what I, Lisa, I was just telling the audience, you send me these questions beforehand, and it's such an interesting just self journey that I'm like, God, how do you make a difference in the world? But I'll tell you what my hope is that I feel like the study of generations is the most human way to understand change. It like puts humans in the center of the story. And I go to a ton of conferences just like you, and I get to see incredible speakers, and you see that there's a lot of different ways to help people grapple with the issues of our time and to understand change. There's technologists who view it through a technological lens. There's political commentators who view it through a political lens. And I've always found that the generational lens is the human story of like how the ethos of an era is defined, how it evolves, how it shapes us. And so I try to give people language to describe the phenomena that they see with their own eyes and that they experience in their own world. And I think there's something powerful in that, in providing that language. And just before we hit record here, for the listeners, Lisa and I were talking about some of our, some books that have really stuck with us. And it's The Anxious Generation, Bowling Alone. For me, I would put Sapiens up there. And you look at some of these best-selling nonfiction books that have really moved people, and what they really have in common is that they created this ability to provide a collective narrative and build a language and context around people's experiences. And I think that provides this sense of comfort, of perspective, and of community. And so that's what I try to do.
Oh, I love that. And when I've looked at your work and some of the books you've mentioned, I am so grateful that people like you exist because you hold up a mirror for us and then you explain why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. And for me, the beauty is in the why, because when we double click many, many layers, that's where innovation comes. That's where ideas come from. That's where change happens. Like when you, and I know we're going to talk about some of the people who inspire us, but when I look at your work specifically, it's not just let me hold up the mirror, it's let me show you 5 layers beneath that in
Mm,
terms of what's driving it. Why are we seeing a fertility crisis in America? What are the things that are underlying, and then therefore how do individuals and organizations change that or adapt to it? Is that fair to say when you think about your work?
that is That is exactly fair to say. And maybe I don't, I try, I'm not like by nature a grandiose person, so I don't know if this is how I'm like changing the world, but I do think that it is in that why where people can have some empathy and understanding for one another, because there's been a million, I mean, you think about in the workplace of there's been conversations about generational differences forever, and it's always this kind of same old story of like, why aren't they willing to sacrifice the same thing I sacrificed? And how come what motivated me doesn't seem to motivate them? And no one wants to work anymore. And, all these things. And I think when you can peel back some of the layers of why, when a new generation moves into these different life stages, they may approach it differently. Why is that? Why do people approach work differently now than they used to? What are the technological changes, the economic changes, the cultural changes that have impacted or that have created a different relationship between an individual and their work? How does a new generation approach parenting differently?
Hmm.
And most people would say that they do not parent their own children the exact same way that they themselves were parented. Why is that? People age so differently now. And so I think it's just going, yes, those whys, that's where you can just try to approach something with more curiosity, with less judgment, so that you can really try to understand where another person is coming from. And that's how we get all of these different people with different motivations to try to row the boat in the same direction, which really seems to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges of our moment.
And why do you do it? Let me be curious for a moment. And our theme this week is compassion and curiosity. So, why do you do this work?
Um, I I was very young when I read Jean Twain's book, The Generation Me, and some of the listeners may remember this book. It was kind of it was the big millennial era book, and Jean Twain herself is not a millennial, but she's a great researcher, and reading that book, I was like in high school, and I felt like she was listening to me and my friends. I'm like, oh my God, how does she know some of this? And what she did really well, even, writing for a very young audience, was helping me personally see how the events and conditions that I existed in during my adolescence, my young adulthood, when I was so young and so porous, how this really ended up shaping some of the ways in which I see the world. And so, I was very young when Barack Obama became president for the first time, and that was a very unique generational moment. I was a sophomore in college when the smartphone first came out, and that transformed the experience of being young in this country. I was, still a young adult when Twitter's algorithm like fundamentally changed, and that really changed the way that young people got news, their understanding of information. I mean, so I actually think that my obsession with this topic is very pedestrian. I think it's why all of us are interested in it, because we all remember our own formative years, and we think about the music we listen to and the pop culture, but we also think about the like who was president and how we understood the world. And of course that story evolves, but there's something that's so formative about what is surrounding you when you're trying to put a stake in the ground, when you're trying to uncover who you are.
I love, and then you were like, that's a real job. That's cool. That's
I
a
mean,
real
it
job. I
kind
could
of
do
was.
that job.
Yeah, so Lynn Lancaster and David Stillman, who are wonderful, wonderful writers. I like wrote them fan mail. I was like, I love your books. Like, I don't know what I mean. Is again, this is like a different era where you could just like do that, um, and I started working for them when I was very young. They were working on a book at the time called The M Factor, which was about millennials, and I worked on that. I stayed with them. They ended up selling that company. Myself and other people kind of went out on our own, but I had amazing mentors. Yeah, I should have said that first and foremost. Like generous, smart people who opened doors for me and showed me that it can be a career to obsessively study one
I think
topic.
I think you have the career I wish I had. I really would have enjoyed being a researcher. One of my mentors once said to me, "It takes two generations to forget something." And
Mm,
and what he
oh my
meant by
God.
that is he said, when you think about transformational change, it takes two full generations. And the example he used was he said, when the Berlin Wall came down, 1989, and he said there were still East Berliners and West Berliners. And then all of a sudden, the grandkids didn't remember that there was a wall. So the grandparent would still talk about East and West Germany. And then when the Cold War disappeared, and I was 10 years old when the Berlin Wall fell, I still remember watching that on TV. He said, but then two generations later, the grandkids won't remember there was a wall. It'll be United Germany. But he said it'll take two full generations to forget something. And one of the reasons I love what you do is you won't let us forget.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, you'll explain to us what big transformations on the horizon or is happening in real time.
Mhm.
Uh, what makes a great researcher? What are the qualities of being good at your job?
Well, um, I need to say this that I do not have a PhD. And so that's an important part because there are a lot of different ways to, conduct different types of research. And we can talk all day about why I decided not to go into academia and there's different stories. But to make it, I mean, this is such a like cliched answer, and I think any researcher would say this is I guess it's kind of two things. Maybe one is just you have to be so curious. You have to
Mm,
genuinely want to know.
mm.
And especially in this kind of research, when I spend so much time with young people, you need that craving to want to see the world through their eyes. And that dictates the uncovery questions that you ask, the follow-up questions that you ask, the strings that you keep pulling on in order to get to something more real. And in you also have to recognize that people are unreliable narrators. And so you can't take, one a handful of individual stories and pull forward these wide-ranging generalizations. Like things need to be hit up against more quantifiable data so that we can find a truth in the middle of the story that is someone's individual truth.
Hmm.
And then the broader data sets, which represent perhaps something more objective. And I have to keep myself out of it. I think that's always been something that's tainted this story of generations, is that there are a lot of people where it's like, oh, I'm a millennial, so I'll speak on behalf of 82 million young people, or I'm a Gen Zer and I'll speak on behalf of 76 million young people. Like my opinion and my experience is not relevant. I divorce it from my work um, because it puts the integrity of the research into question. And I work in different countries. I work in all 50 states. I work with people in all types of ethnic backgrounds and political backgrounds and racial backgrounds, and you have to be able to see it from that more neutral view.
This is exactly why I wanted you on this week,
Mm,
because our challenge this week is about compassion and curiosity. And one of the major themes is it's not about you.
yeah.
And compassion requires you to put yourself in someone else's story, to have empathy for someone else's story. And curiosity requires you to ask, what is the story here? Like, what am I not seeing? What do you know that I don't know? And I feel like as a researcher, you're constantly saying, like, I want to be in that other person's head
Yes.
and really get into it. Is there something you're curious about right now that you're researching?
Yeah. So, these generational perceptions of sacrifice. This is an area that I've been really interested in, and this started because I am currently on a project in the credit union space, and I've done a lot of work in traditional banking because I do work with on the topic of generational wealth transfer. So, like when a new generation comes into money, what does it mean for risk appetite and philanthropic giving, entrepreneurship rates, status signaling, all of those things. Then on the credit union side, because credit unions are nonprofits, they have a different structure than traditional banks, and they really, that's part of their big sale is like we're community driven, nonprofit, we're not big banks. And a lot of young people don't know anything about credit unions, and that's why I came on to try to be like, what is this story here and how do you tell it? And it was through this research that I specifically started looking at sacrifice and this idea of what are people willing to sacrifice in order to be aligned with a purpose-driven brand. So to expand on the credit union example, it's like credit unions also do not have the budget of Chase and of Bank of America. And so some of the apps might not look exactly like the Wells Fargo app, right? Some of the technological capabilities might not be an exact replication of what Citi has. Are you willing to make those trade-offs? You know, um and what does that look like? And then I think in the workplace there is just this looming question of like what are people willing to sacrifice for their job?
Mm.
And that is what I think is at the core of this like work ethic debate of this like, you know, some of this generational hazing, this idea of like if you can't have what I have unless you go through exactly what I went through. And I think we're in a time of real reevaluation around that. So that has been an area that I'm interested in of like what are people willing to sacrifice in order to show that they care about the things they say they care about. What is that difference between these attitude behavior gaps, that tension point between who we say we are and who we are.
Well, I want to double click because I am a curious person. So
Yeah.
I'm going to,
Oh, I know you are.
when I think about the idea of sacrifice, and this is imperfect, I think of sort of maybe two buckets, right? One bucket, which is, I'm going to use a simple example of care about the climate,
Hmm.
climate change. I care about the planet. And when you ask me, though, to sacrifice not buying fast fashion,
Yeah.
or you ask me to sacrifice my Starbucks paper cup in exchange for a real cup that you refill, like my tolerance changes around what I believe and what I'm going to do, separate from what I think of sacrifice that kind of changes culture. So work-life balance is a priority to me. I will be a better worker if you allow me to have a mental wellness day, in which case the idea of my willingness to go through what you went through is lower because I'm making the workplace better. I
Mm-hmm.
think of that in like two different buckets. What
Yes.
are you seeing in the research around both? And that might be an imperfect way to categorize it, but like the word sacrifice is a catch-all. I'm like, I could see both being okay. One being like, I question if you're walking the talk. The other
Yeah.
one being like, your unwillingness to sacrifice actually is trying to make this a better place to work in 20 years.
Yeah. Yep. Um, oh, that's such a good like way to think about it. And I will tell, and just like all listeners, like bear with me because this is sort of a new idea, and the research has been so focused because it's been commissioned by a specific industry. So it's like I have not done the broad scope exploration yet, but it's just this like nugget that
This
I'm like, oh, what is that?
I just want to say this out loud because you're a researcher and I'm an entrepreneur. So the entrepreneur in me is like, let's go and like go down these pathways, even though we don't have the data. And you're like, this is new for me. And it's because we had a phone call and I think we spent 45 minutes of our hour and a half on this topic. And I was like,
Yeah.
I just have to like put it on the podcast because it's so interesting to me.
Well, and Lisa just like being the just truest form of entrepreneur, like within those 45 minutes where I'm doing a lot of hedging, right? I'm like, well, we don't have the data and I'm trying and like I don't even really have like the architecture for how I'd want to, do that and whatever. And she's got like the idea for like how do you discuss this? What is the name of it? All this stuff. I'm like, oh, she's so good.
Well, no, it's only because we like afterwards I text you. I'm like, I have the name of your book. At what cost? The New Rules of Sacrifice. So I was like, I want you to write
And
this book because I want to
and
read
I've
it.
told so many people that I'm like the 45 minutes and this is like what Lisa Sun named the entire like phenomenon, and they were like, who is this person? Like that is unbelievable. So it's good, it is really good. But that is such a good question of like what, and you're right, there are definitely different ways of thinking about sacrifice and different ways that we categorize it. And I also want to, like, I am just not one for ideological purity in really any sense. And that includes like sacrificial purity. Like, I could never write something that's like, if you're not always walking the walk, like, you should be ashamed. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not at all what I'm getting at. I think it's a question of, I think there's a business question in here of like, how do we determine where people are willing to make trade-offs, and how, there's like a messaging aspect to that of figuring out like, okay, well, if we have some information on that, then how do we best message that? Um, God, but I'm like all over the place
And
with it.
and
Yeah.
the reason I asked the question, Kim, and this is why I think we're just demonstrating for our listeners what curiosity sounds like,
Yeah.
because I like that we're both curious humans. When I think about the work you're doing on this, and I think about how it kind of shapes the way we make decisions, if you're in the first, my crude categorization, if you're in the first kind of sacrifice around, you say you believe in something, let me show you something that aligns with that values. Are you willing to participate? So your example, and I, by the way, for many years banked with a regional bank that ended up getting acquired by
Mhm.
Chase. And I was willing to put up with the crappy app and the paper checks. And because I felt like I was part of something that was regional, that was treating people well, and I was willing to sacrifice, the convenience of the Chase app.
Mhm.
In those instances, I imagine leaders can market to it, can explain why, and we can nudge people towards decisions that align with their values. In the other way, though, I think about, hey, you know what? Like, I agree with you. This is a moment where you shouldn't sacrifice. And
Mhm.
it's better for the world, culture, organizations, because you have decided not to sacrifice. Like, that's why I'm fascinated with the fact that
Yeah.
you're researching it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we've really like gotten to an interesting point where there is some messaging that kind of like any form of sacrifice feels like an insurmountable inconvenience. And so I'll use the example because I know that both of us, and I'm sure many listeners, are familiar with the book Bowling Alone, are just that overall concept of what has happened to community formation in this country over the last 50 years. And so this is rising loneliness and people spending a lot more time alone than they used to. People are spending more time alone now than they even did during COVID. And so it's not like there was like a COVID dip and then we all came back together. That has not happened. And I even think like there's a lot of sacrifice that happens in order to be a part of a community. A lot of people are going to bug you. People are annoying. Like that's the nature of being out in the world is like someone's going to be talking too loud or talking about stuff that you don't want to talk about and there are all these things, but how do you measure like what you are okay, the discomfort, the inconvenience that you're willing to just overcome in order to be in this thing. And that is so interesting, especially because nothing is more convenient and friction free than being alone. But
Mm.
it is like tearing away at the fabric of our society.
So I have to tell a story, and for those listeners who don't know Bowling Alone, Robert Putnam, we're like fangirling Robert Putnam. He will
Like,
never
huge,
hear this
huge.
podcast.
Oh my God, Robert, please do listen to it and know how much we love
we
you.
we might just need to clip it and try to get it to his agent. But if you haven't read Bowling Alone, at least read the New York Times piece where they interviewed Robert Putnam, who's now in his 80s, but an incredible academic who was at Harvard and looked at from I think it was like the 50s and 60s to date and around the fact that he said everyone in the 50s and 60s was in a bowling league and you would mingle with people outside of your socioeconomic demographic. You would connect. And he's like, it's not surprising that the Civil Rights Act came through this generation, that we sent a person to space. He's sort of like there was this community sense. And he advised every president after that polarization, loneliness was going to happen if we didn't encourage people to be a part of their community.
Yeah.
And so please read the New York Times article, at least if you're not going to read his book. And one of the things that I love that you and I were talking about earlier, there's a young man who I'm a mentor to, who's 23, who just moved to a new city. And I caught up with him on Sunday. And he's like, Lisa, the hardest thing is from 6 to 10 p.m. after I've done with work, what do I do with myself? I'm not living at home. I'm not with my roommates from college. Like, this is the first time on my own. And I literally said, well, you went to UNC Chapel Hill. Look up the alumni group and go to watch a football game or a basketball game. You play pickup basketball, join a urban professional league, reach out to friends and I was giving him my playbook from when I moved to DC by myself in 2000 and lived alone for the first time. And his first reaction to me is like, oh my gosh, that's so cringe. That's so awkward. I don't like to go places I don't know anyone. And I said, but you all went to Chapel Hill. Isn't that a connection? Well, like if I didn't meet them in college, am I really going to be friends with them now? Like we don't have any shared interests. And there's almost this chasm of awkwardness, embarrassment, because we've operated on a smartphone that I worry for Gen Z, for Alpha, that Robert Putnam ain't wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't. Just when we look at like, measurable involvement in communal events and that includes religion. Which is, a different thing that we can also talk about because there's some data that would suggest that we're in the middle of somewhat of this like religious resurgence, mostly just because of this community aspect. Um, I don't want to be like overly Pollyanna, but something that does actually make me optimistic is that I do talk to so many young people where I think that kind of cringe, awkward moment, like the pendulum is kind of swinging back away from that. Like I feel like we've sort of had 5 years, definitely post COVID, definitely as young people had this just unceremonious catapult into adulthood.
Mm.
Then there's been, I feel like, a bit of a swing back of um, like everything great is on that other side of embarrassment. You have to, you just have to just deal with it. You got to muscle through it. And there's something great there. And there is this other kind of youth culture that I feel like is not always talked about, but this culture of real courage and dynamism and forward momentum and this idea of like to be alive is electric. And um, I feel that in a lot of
Mm.
ways when and I'm, for listeners who either, have young adult kids or teach on college campuses, um, you see that like sprouting up a lot.
Well, I think you are a prime example of how curiosity can make a huge difference in the
Mm,
world. Because when I think about our first conversation that we had about sacrifice, I was thinking to myself, it's going to be Robert Putnam meets Jonathan Haidt, because I think all the insights are, I feel like Anxious Generation, like it it was it's an incredible book, but it catapulted change in schools, right? Put the phones in
totally.
bags, don't.
Transformed the conversations that parents were having with one another. Talk about community. I think one of the best things that John Haidt did in that book, of which there were so many, was saying this is not an individual issue. If it's
Mm,
one parent taking a phone away from one kid, not only has that done nothing, but now this one child is going to suffer the consequences of significant social isolation. And like, was that worth it? Maybe not. We don't know, but these parents have to come together. And I have seen in school districts all over the country the conversation that this has forced among parents, the community that it has had to create on that really local school level. And what a gift. I mean,
mm.
I feel like once in a generation, a book comes out that really changes, um, the way that people relate to each other, and community is built around that.
Well, I can't wait to read your book, because I know whatever you're going to research on this topic of sacrifice is going to make a huge difference for
Thank you.
communities and for leaders. It's really cool what you get to do. We every week for this season have a weekly challenge where
Mhm.
we are giving our community a chance to choose something that might feel uncomfortable but ladders up how confident they are in the world. And this week's challenge is how we show up when there's friction or frustration, and we're encouraging people to pause long enough to get curious, to lead with compassion, curiosity, assuming positive intent, asking better questions, seeking to understand before being understood, sort of genuine interest to build connection and trust and clarity with people.
Mhm.
When you think about the phrase compassion and curiosity, what does it mean to you?
Yeah. Um, I think at its core, in my world, it's just try to see the world through the eyes of someone else
Mm.
while maintaining your backbone and your unique perspective. So that's like my one addition there.
Okay, I get the first part.
Yeah.
Double click on the backbone part.
I was also just thinking about kind of like your concept of like confidence and like how you build that. And I think sometimes in an effort to be incredibly compassionate, you take on someone else's truth as either your truth as well or a
Mm.
universal truth. And this kind of goes back to that question you asked about like what does it really take to be a good researcher? And it's both of it's really wanting to understand someone, respecting and leaving space for their story, asking the questions that are going to get them to something that is deeper within themselves, and um, not, being cognizant of what we extrapolate from someone else's story, being cognizant of like you can still completely respect someone's reality. You can respect their experience. You can take it into consideration as you move forward in the world and make decisions, but you're also allowed to have a unique
Mm.
perspective. You're also allowed to exist alongside um, another person.
I love that. And that's actually the part of the researcher that we didn't get to earlier, which is you can ask, you can listen, you can probe, you can be unbiased. And then at some point, you do the analysis and you do bring your own point of view to what this all means. So I love that. You can lead with compassion and curiosity and not forget who you are in that process.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Can you share a time when curiosity changed a situation for you?
I think it's all the time. I think it's in marriage. I think it, I mean, it's just all the time. It's 1 second of taking a deep breath, remembering that the person that you are having this moment of conflict with is also a human person deserving of understanding and empathy, and recognizing that like you guys may be seeing something from a very different lens and
Mm.
trying to get to the core of like, how are you seeing this? How are you experiencing this?
I love that you brought marriage into the equation because I do that with my boyfriend all the time. I'm like, can I just be curious for a moment? Can I
Yeah.
get curious with you? And he'll be like, oh God, here we go. Like, what do you, I'm like, can you just explain what you were thinking when you chose to do
Yeah.
that? And he's like, here's what I was thinking. I'm like, okay, I understand that. But I will tell you when I got curious the most is when I learned that I was his longest long-term relationship he's ever had from
Mm,
his sister-in-law. And I was like, that explains so much.
yeah.
Okay, you have not done anniversary or birthdays or major holidays enough times to know that they need to be special. And it
Right.
was like,
Right.
thank goodness I was curious. Okay, I'm not comparing myself to previous relationships. Well, I'm sure before you had a girlfriend, you did this. He's like, never had a girlfriend that long. So now I know
Good.
what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Why do you think we judge? Like, why do you think is that our first reaction to someone?
Because we're always trying to prove to ourselves that we made the right decision.
Oh, boom. Okay.
That's,
Mic drop. Mic drop.
I think that's what it is.
We're
I see it in
defending our own
myself.
choices. Yeah.
I see it in myself.
You know, what's a question you want leaders to ask this week to better understand someone from another generation or worldview? Is there something you would want to gift them today?
This is sort of niche, and so you can decide if this is, but I'll share a question that has been very interesting for me in my research interviews, which this is a question of what messages about this topic are showing up on your social media feed.
That is a great question.
And I have found that I get such interesting insight from that because it depersonalizes it for a moment where I'm not out the gate asking them, what do you think about this? Who are you voting for? How do you, it isn't that. It's like, what do you see? What messages? And that can actually give you a lot of insight into what their algorithm looks like, which can give you a lot of insight into what their reality looks like, what their interests are. So I like that question. You can
I
ask your,
love that question. I'm going, most of mine is Cavapoo world now because I just got a puppy. So my entire algorithm is Cavapoos.
yeah.
Um, you know, one question I ask my interns every summer, because they're now 2 generations apart from me, is I say, teach me a piece of slang. And
Mm-hmm.
this summer I learned about aura farming and aura points and aura, and previous ones I've learned about Riz and
Yeah.
left no crumbs. I love asking folks, teach me a piece of slang. Right now it's like bra and like
Yeah.
low key fire. So yours is better. What are you seeing on your social media feed messaging right now?
Yeah.
Um, for those of for those of us who are not yet leaders, what would you encourage them to think about in terms of embodying compassion and curiosity?
Like for aspiring leaders.
Yes, because I think when a millennial gets asked why, they're labeled as confrontational.
Yeah. Um, you know what? I honestly think that the same thing comes through for this, which is also like as an aspiring leader, you try to understand the
Mm,
world through the eyes of someone else. And to bring this kind of back to that story of sacrifice, I do sometimes, I'll talk to young people and they'll talk about, work-life balance. And if you grow up with a technological backdrop where so much can be done virtually, some of this, the idea of like everyone being in the office from this time to this time and your time being policed and having to take like PTO to go to a 30-minute dentist appointment, like the whole thing feels insane. But when I talk to older people about their journey into leadership and to success, it's that whole journey is covered in these sacrifices.
Mm,
It's missed anniversary dinners, it's missed baseball
mm,
games. It's because they didn't have a choice.
mm.
The cultural norms were different, the technology was not, it didn't allow for this type of work. And sometimes I think that an aspiring leader, a younger person, can gain a lot of credibility, a lot of respect by just simply understanding that the journey into leadership and into success in a different generation was fundamentally different, and there were different things that needed to be given up in order to
Yeah.
make it.
I love that. And, I'm going to be open with you. I love it when younger people ask me, like, what was it like when you were climbing the ladder? Or
Mm,
what's something that you wish you had known? I love it when they ask me because I feel that sense of curiosity. And often I say, the mentor chooses you. You don't choose the mentor. Make yourself mentorable.
yes,
And
yes,
I love it. So I love the two sets of questions. One is, what are you seeing on your social media algorithm that I should know about?
yeah.
And then I love the
Or
reverse
more
questions
specifically, like on this topic. Like
on
I,
this
I even
topic.
yes, I'm like
Yes.
on whatever, like that's on like
What's the world
mental
saying to
health.
you?
Yeah,
I
like
love
mental
that.
health. What do you
I
see? Like yeah.
I love that. Like live soft or like,
Yes.
touch grass.
Yeah.
And then I love the reverse, which is like, what was it like when you were in my shoes?
Yeah.
And I think that surfaces a really interesting conversation that is compassionate and curious. Because if I do, and every time I get asked it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I had to dial up and I had to like go to payphones and check my voicemail and dial an 800 number to see what I missed.
Yeah.
I had a Palm Pilot. I didn't, and then I got a Blackberry, it's sort of, and I know they roll their eyes, but I always go like, you can do on AI something that would have taken me 3 hours in 10 minutes. And so I respect that, but also please understand that it was much harder for me back in the day. So
Totally. And that is a valuable um that is a valuable story. I will say that like children of immigrants, I think have a like more innate sense of that because
mm,
so that first generation immigrant, a generation oftentimes of sacrifice, like setting aside their individual needs in order to achieve the needs of the family, of the greater good, that type of thing. And so I think there's an interesting piece there around, your own generational story of sacrifice
mm,
that you inherit and the way
mm.
that that informs how you move in the world.
I can't wait to hear what you're going to be learning because I actually think that's an interesting thread too, which is a lot of my friends who are immigrant kids, their kids, they often have the like, I would have never acted that way with my mother, because I didn't have the luxury of it. And sure, you're going to talk back to me. I cannot wait to see where you go with this topic. Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on In Confidence. This is so fun.
I could talk to you forever. I'll spare the audience, but thank you for having me.
I hope you loved this episode of In Confidence. I hope you're leaving the space stronger, more curious, more compassionate. Some of the things I loved about what Kim does as a researcher is she asks questions that invite curiosity. Specifically, I'm going to be using two of her questions. I love the one that is about in your childhood, what are things that stood out to you? Because I think that's a great dinner party question if you're trying to get curious about something. I also love her question that leaders can ask, which is, hey, this thing that we're wrestling with, what messages are you seeing on social media? Asking great questions, actively listening, following up, going down threads, help us each uncover the whys that lead to how we move forward. I also love how human she is because I think to be a researcher, I love that she can sit inside someone else's story and at the same time hold her own. That balance is what I want for you. So thank you, Kim. And I hope you enjoyed this week's challenge, which is lead with compassion and curiosity. If you love this episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe so you never miss a moment of inspiration. And make sure you're participating in our last quarter challenge on LinkedIn. There's a giveaway every week when you share with us the impact that this week's theme has made for you. Until next time, in the words of my 9-year-old self, I see you, I value you, and I believe in you. This is In Confidence.